Hi, I'm Varvaloucas. I'm the Executive Director of the Progress Network. We are gathering together constructive public voices, some of whom you know, some of whom might be new to you, who can show us how the future might be better. You can find more information about us at theprogressnetwork.org. And I'm here with Peniel Joseph. He's a member of the Progress Network. He's a historian who teaches at the University of Texas, Austin, where he founded the Center for the Study of Race and Democracy. He's a leading voice on race issues. He's here today to talk to us about that, as well as his new book, which is The Sword and the Shield, a double biography of two giants of the civil rights movement, Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. So Peniel, welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me, Emma.
Yeah. So I wanted to start with something that you put up on Twitter that actually you wrote for, I believe it was the Good Politics newsletter. And you wrote, "This year of plague, racial violence, and economic collapse has also been a time of great promise, ecstatic organizing, and joyful manifestations of citizenship, freedom, and democracy." Right now we're in the middle of 2020. I think this picture of plague, racial violence, economic collapse, that seems extraordinarily clear to all of us, not only in our hearts, but we read it on the news all the time. But this other picture that you end with there, this picture of joy, this demonstration of democratic principles, I don't think it's the picture that people are carrying with them right now. So can you paint that picture for us? I mean, what are you talking about here?
Yeah, really, I'm talking about since George Floyd's murder on May 25th, 2020, we've seen over 7,000 separate anti-racist demonstrations in over 2,400 different spaces in the United States, but also globally. So I'm talking about 20 million people for the first time in American history coming out for racial justice, starting with just one protest in Minneapolis on May 26th and expanding to tens of millions of people, including many, many white Americans who for the first time, and white citizens around the world for the first time, took notice of racial injustice, Black lives, but really intersectional injustice as well. So we're talking about Portland mothers against violence, locking arm in arm. We're talking about mothers and children and young people in Los Angeles, in Austin, Texas, facing down law enforcement, facing down injustice, demanding investment in people and communities, and a disinvestment in lethal first responders, so reimagining public safety. So we've been seeing all this extraordinary movement to try to transform both American democracy, but really the world. And we're seeing it on a scale that we've never witnessed before in history, really. So I think that that's all very, very progressive, and that's good news.
So what do you see as the potential for this moment? I mean, there's this expansiveness of it, and in the way that the whole world has been caught up in it. And what kind of hope or potential do you see in that?
Yeah, I think we have a huge, huge hope, huge potential, generational opportunities. It's going to take generations, but really to forge a new American consensus about citizenship, freedom, democracy, but then a global consensus simultaneously. Because the reason why we saw demonstrations in Berlin and Munich and Oxford and London and really around the world, sympathy demonstrations, is that they're facing their own racial and economic oppression. LGBTQIA folks who are oppressed, they're facing incarceration, they're facing hunger when we think about Brexit and we think about what's happening globally, wealth inequality globally, segregation globally, the impact of neoliberalism globally. So I think people have really by themselves at the local level marched and demonstrated and really put forth great policy proposals. I think I've never seen a movement that is so in lockstep with how to not just reimagine public safety, but what does citizenship mean? What does it mean to reimagine public safety, reimagine how we invest in the military industrial prison complex and put those investments in ending food insecurity nationally and globally, in having first-class education for everyone, in having really a Green New Deal for the planet and for the United States, right? And how does that look? And people have the policy answers right there at the tip of their tongue, right? So I think this is really, really an extraordinary time. People are talking about reparations for Black people, but also for Indigenous and people of color. People are talking about ending the abuse of people who are non-able-bodied, people who are mentally, emotionally challenged. People are talking about healthcare for all, ending this idea of if you can't afford your insulin or if you can't afford any of your medication, that somehow that's not a human right. So there's so much good happening amidst turmoil of really this dying, chaotic order and this disorder. And so many people, even with the president trying to prevent people from voting, defunding the post office, telling everyone that the election is going to be a fraud unless he wins. People are organizing. People are planning to vote early. You can see the Democratic Party has raised hundreds of millions of dollars, small donations as well as large. So people are hungry for change, and they're manifesting it in their day-to-day lives. And what's so extraordinary is that they understand that change means ending racial injustice. If we want more public safety, we have to help those without, and that's going to be connected to our own futures.
Yeah, and it sounds to me what you're saying is that, you hear the sort of critique of protests and demonstrations a lot, that you're just pointing out a problem, you're not presenting a solution, right? And, what do you want us to do? And you're saying here that there's actually not only the pointing out of the problem, but people are presenting possible solutions.
Oh, absolutely. And people are bringing the receipts, Emma, in detail. Like we have a Black contract with America, Derek Hamilton. We've got Black economists like Jacoba Williams. We have so many different people, some of whom are connected to TPN, but thought leaders, political activists, right? You think about the scholar Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor. You think about so many different activists who are writing, who are organizing. And we're talking about everything from environmental racism and injustice to domestic violence against women, to Black women and maternal health care outcomes, to the non-able-bodied, to the prison industrial complex, residential public school segregation, unemployment, wealth inequality, and of course the criminal justice system and how it's tied into all these different things. So no, this is an extraordinary time, and that's why it should be hopeful. People understand the connection between their own lives and everything from the environment to venture capital and philanthropy to tax codes and zoning. It's an extraordinary period in American history. So people are protesting, but they're protesting with a real purpose, which is why there are forces at play who are trying to foment racial division, foment anti-democratic violence, foment the hacking of this election, whether those are global and domestic forces, because people are coming with a bold new vision of what America and the world could be like.
Mm-hmm. And to bring up another critique, which is, you've mentioned hope and you've mentioned purpose. And I think sometimes when you talk about things from the sort of like positive framework of all the exciting things that are going on right now and all the solutions, that people feel that there's something disingenuous about that, or maybe like not strategic, that in talking about, okay, these are all the good things that are happening, that somehow that's taking away focus on all of the problems that still need to be addressed. Do you think that's a valid critique here?
I think it's only valid if people aren't talking about, the real challenges and the obstacles we face. But we have to do both, because we can't just say that the country and the world they are irredeemable. We can say that there are things that are happening that are politically indefensible, that are morally reprehensible, but that the country and the world can be redeemed because people themselves can transform this country and this world. So that's really important. So what's exciting about 2020, nobody's pinning their hopes on one person or one movement. Certainly the Black Lives Matter movement has been the catalyst. It's been very, very generative, right? But Black Lives Matter, what makes it so much of a catalyst and such a galvanizing force, it realizes that you have to search for intersectional justice. So when you talk about Black lives, you have to talk about trans, you have to talk about feminists, you have to say, yes, we are for everything. We are for all the underdogs. We are for Native people, Indigenous people, We are for people who are non-able-bodied. We are for poor people, all of it. And so from that perspective, we have to be hopeful because we are a global majority. Sometimes people say we're a minority, but we're not. We're a global majority. And these are not protesters. These are people who are really fighting to create what Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community, one that was free of racial injustice, economic poverty, but also violence. We have to remember, King talked about wealth inequality and he talked about violence. And I think we're seeing what is really organizing neoliberalism globally across the planet is not just wealth inequality. Absolutely, wealth inequality is part of it, but it's real violence. And the violence comes in multiple forms. As you know, Emma, we have wars raging around the world, both global wars and imperial wars, but also civil wars. But we also have the structural violence of things like sex trafficking and the rape and sexual assault of women and trans women. We also have structural violence in terms of food insecurity globally, right? We have the structural violence of monetary policies that force certain countries like Greece and others to have a politics of restraint that are actually destroying generations in perpetuity. And the world says, or the world's oligarchs say that this is good financial policy, right? And so we have violence in so many different quarters, and King was very aware that the violence he was against was not just the violence in Vietnam and the violence in Selma, but it was also the violence that let people go hungry in a world that had more than abundant food for all of us many times over, right? And so we're really against violence, against racism, against wealth inequality, but inequality in all of its forms. And I think that that's a very, very hopeful sign. And so many people have gotten a new political consciousness during this time period. So it's not just when we think about the environmental activists, young folks in Scandinavia, Greta, and these folks, it's all of us. Like it's all of us. It's kids in Compton, California, and in the Mississippi Delta, and on Native American reservations in the Dakotas that understand what's going on in this time. And it's the combination of the COVID pandemic, the government's failed response, but also racial injustice and this search for Black dignity and Black citizenship that has galvanized the world.
Yeah. And these ideas about global progress and making that progress together, these are things that you talk about in your book in terms of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, even though they're commonly remembered as opposites of one another, that Malcolm X is sort of the firebrand, radical, Martin Luther King is the peace-loving dove, but actually their ideas influence one another and are closer together than people might realize. So do you see what's happening today as a fruition of those seeds that were planted, back in the 60s and prior to that?
No, absolutely. Malcolm X talked about radical Black dignity and ending white supremacy, and Dr. King talked about radical Black citizenship and ending systemic racism. Over time, they come to see that you need both. Even though Malcolm X believed in self-defense and anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism, over time, with the ballot or the bullet, he comes to understand the need for democratic reforms as well. And Dr. King, even though he's always this nonviolent shield, he also becomes this political sword using civil disobedience to occupy Washington, D.C. and lead this poor people's campaign. So you need both. And I think the Black Lives Matter movement and really these Me Too movements, March for Our Lives, DACA and DAPA for the rights of immigrants and undocumented globally, pro-Muslim movements, when we think about human rights issues in the Middle East, have really said we're going to forge this beloved community and finally achieve a world that is based on human rights and human dignity and citizenship for all people. Whether people have that recognized status or not, we're going to recognize them. So it's really an extraordinary period of time. And even though it's a difficult period, it's also a hopeful period.
Yeah, you've mentioned a lot of different issues, right, that activists in particular are fighting for right now. And a lot of these issues are places where the problems are particularly emotionally distressing. The problems seem particularly entrenched. And, I'm just wondering, we've talked about hope. Is progress not only something to be hopeful for, but it's something that's realistic right now?
Oh yeah, I think progress is realistic, but there's also going to be setbacks. We have to organize, organize, organize. That's what Malcolm and Martin did, Ella Baker, Angela Davis, Fannie Lou Hamer. So people are going to have to organize on behalf of small d democracy, citizenship, freedom, to build an anti-racist future where racial justice and really intersectional justice for all is centered in our policies. And globally, we're going to have to defeat thousands of racist and sexist and homophobic and queerphobic and transphobic policies, and policies that are against the poor and policies that are against democracy. But if we organize together, yes, I do believe we can win. And we all have to believe that, even if that victory, final ultimate victory, doesn't come in our lifetimes, but that we can win.
Great. Peniel, thank you so much, especially for the, positive framing. Not a lot of people are feeling that positive this year, so it's helpful and we appreciate it. And thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Emma. I enjoyed it.